We have now assembled for you a panel of international journalists. You would have heard yesterday from the commissioner. We spoke to Dr. Mike Masia-Pato from the Border Management Authority that they accredited 1,800 journalists for this event. So we have some of them with us here this morning. From the China Global Television Network, we have their reporter, Zhao Yunfei, our very own researcher, Velim Tiane, and then from Venezuela, the Venezuelan journalist Graya Casella with her interpreter Cristina Torralba joining us here this morning for the discussion. Let's just get straight into it. Yunfei, for you, what has been the important discussions that you have highlighted for your viewers, your listeners and readers back home?
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, Sukina. So we've been here and looking forward to many things. And one thing that really impressed me is that the number of the things on the agenda, the de-dollarization, the expansion of BRICS, as well as a lot of the South Africans mentioned about the energy situation over here. So I think there are not many organizations or meetings or summits like BRICS summits that really covered so many topics at one time. So you can certainly feel the importance of developing countries are really seeking a way of promoting a global governance. And this kind of global governance is now currently dominated by the West, but certainly the countries from the global South are really looking forward to for any of the changes.
Really, from our perspective as South Africa, again, yesterday we saw a lot of the journalists moving around and very important topics being discussed. So how has it been from our perspective in terms of what our listeners, viewers and readers want to get from this particular summit?
Well, I think firstly for us, I think the issue that concerns everyone from the ground is the issue of the energy security and the announcement by the Chinese President Xi Jinping that South Africa will receive emergency power equipment worth 167 million rands, and we have been told that that equipment has already left China. It's coming into South Africa, and the Minister of Electricity did specifically mention that this will be of good use into our hospitals, into our clinics, into our police stations, and I think from south to south cooperation, we could really see that the Chinese intentions about bilateral relations with South Africa are of that much importance, and we are benefiting, and we can see that this is going to be touching the lives of ordinary people, but also the issue of renewables. We know that yesterday the Minister of Energy, the Minister of Electricity did mention that the renewables in China are 12 times the size of ESCOM. So there is so much that we will learn in terms of the skills transfer, so that our project of renewables is also expedited, so that the country's energy security is quickly secured. And
Graya, through Cristina, for Venezuela, your interest in this particular summit, because Venezuela is not a member state, but of course they are very keenly interested, also sending a delegation to attend this particular summit.
Ya Venezuela está acá presente, tenemos a nuestro canciller, arribó ayer en horas de la noche a Sudáfrica.
Venezuela is here present. We have our Minister of International Relations here. He arrived last night.
Estamos ya presentes en este importante evento internacional y Venezuela siempre apostando a la cooperación, a la integración, y sea cual sea el resultado, Venezuela dice que está abierta a grandes inversiones y cooperación con los BRICS.
So whatever the result may be, Venezuela is open to integration, is open to cooperation, is open to great investment in this bloc.
El presidente Nicolás Maduro ayer justamente se refería a los BRICS.
President Nicolás Maduro just yesterday was referring to BRICS.
Y comentaba que Venezuela abre sus puertas para las inversiones y a invertir en las zonas económicas especiales.
And Venezuela is opening their doors for investment and to invest in these economic special zones.
Como un país de grandes oportunidades y de grandes alianzas que se pueden hacer en diversos ámbitos.
With a country with great opportunities and great alliances that we can make in various different spheres.
So, which is very interesting, and coming to you, Yunfei, because we have an unprecedented number of heads of states gathered here in South Africa right now, and as we speak, even more still arriving. So it's obviously a very important gathering right now, but there's a lot going on, and I just want to know from your perspective, are you, for example, able to report on the not so good things happening? If there's anything negative, would you be free to report on that?
Well, of course, we are be able to report on everything that we see on the ground, but it all depends on what kind of things that we are looking at it, whether it's good, whether it's bad, because it's so normal to have different ideas, different ideologies. I think one of the importance of BRICS is to include giving out this kind of inclusiveness, and I think this is a very important environment. I mean, given the fact that President Ramaphosa is sending invitations to like some 70 leaders of the countries, all African nations, as well as leaders from the global south, that's already tell the thing. I mean, we are being inclusive and recruiting, calling for as many members as possible. And my understanding that President Ramaphosa and President Xi are going to co-host a dialogue between China and African countries later on. So I think that will also pave a new way for, cooperation and dialogue between China and African nations.
So what is the perspective in China on Chinese expansion, especially on the African continent? How is that viewed?
I think a lot of the cooperation is under the Belt and Road framework, and China thinks the Belt and Road framework is the way that promotes win-win cooperation. China doesn't really think that this is something supporting African nations. This is a two-way of things because the advancement of, let's say, infrastructure can really benefit people, or local people, and benefit the investment also in Chinese companies. So it's a two-way thing. I believe a lot of African leaders also express that thinking. It's not something like an expansion.
How does Africa see that? South Africa in particular, Benny?
I think we should commend the president for extending the invitation to many African heads of states, because BRICS is not necessarily about South Africa, but it's also about Africa as well, because the role that BRICS can bring in terms of infrastructure development into the various countries is very important. We know that Africa is lagging behind in so many ways, particularly in energy supply, also in infrastructure, and also the voice of Africa's continent is not that powerful in terms of the global institutions, and BRICS is promoting multilateralism so that there isn't a situation whereby only one voice, particularly from the Western countries, is the one that sort of is a top-down approach. It's instruction. There is no win-win cooperation. It's an instruction, and someone must receive and do as they are instructed. So Africa will benefit a lot in terms of this association of South Africa with BRICS, but also in terms of global governance. There are many other issues that needs to be pushed, in particular at United Nations level, where we understand that Africa has not had a seat on the top of the table in terms of UN Security Council, and that has to be considered. It's one of the key issues that President Cyril Ramaphosa and previous presidents of this country and also other African heads of states have been pushing to say we are the one continent with no voice when it comes to the top echelons of the United Nations.
But how have our BRICS counterparts who are represented in those spaces, how have they amplified our voice as Africa in that regard?
Absolutely. China and Russia have been vocal in terms of ensuring that we do have that seat on the table. And you have to understand that the win-win situation of the Global South cooperation is also about multilateralism, so that there isn't someone who's bigger than the other. We are equal. There is no one who's less than the other. Maybe the economies may be different, maybe the military strength may be different, but at the end of the day, the United Nations Charter do recognize each and every state as sovereign. So we must have the African voice represented there. And Russia and China have been doing well in terms of advocating for Africa to have the seat at that table.
Graya, as Venezuela, what is Venezuela hoping, BRICS could do for them if they were to become a member state of the BRICS bloc? How would that be beneficial to Venezuela?
Si logramos ingresar a este importante bloque en algún momento,
if we manage to join the membership of BRICS at a certain time,
se trata de apostar a la integración, a la complementariedad y beneficio ganar, pero sobre todo pensando en los pueblos del mundo.
it's all about complementarism, multilateralism and cooperation, but above all, it is for the people of the countries.
Si algo se ha resaltado durante esta gran cumbre de los BRICS ha sido que estamos viviendo un nuevo mundo, una nueva humanidad de iguales, de mayor solidaridad.
If anything has been highlighted during the summit is that we are entering a new global phase of humanity, of equality.
Como lo decía el compañero, el colega, hay muchas naciones que han quedado por fuera, hay países que piden estar incluidos en estos grandes bloques financieros para que se les dé mayor protagonismo.
As the colleague was saying, there's many countries that have been excluded. Their voices have been excluded in the global structure. And we are asking and we're looking for a platform to be integrated.
Venezuela apuesta siempre al mundo multicéntrico, pluripolar
Venezuela has always supported a multipolar world
y sin dominación.
and without domination.
So we're out of time. Just very briefly, what is the story that you will take back to Venezuela about South Africa as per your experience of BRICS?
¿Y tu experiencia de BRICS?
Sudáfrica es un continente, Sudáfrica pertenece al continente africano de lucha, de resistencia, de batallas y de grandes historias.
South Africa is part of the African continent, a place of struggle, of fighting and of great history.
Para nosotros es un ejemplo de lucha Nelson Mandela,
For us, it's an example of struggle Nelson Mandela,
porque siempre propuso en todos los espacios trabajar como iguales con la justicia social y la paz por delante.
because he always proposed in working together as equals and with peace and with social justice as the first goal.
Y en estos espacios han coincidido los líderes, empresarios, periodistas, que el camino es la paz.
And in this summit, all the leaders, all the businessmen have come together to agree that the way is peace.
Y que a medida que avancemos en la cooperación, en reconocer al otro,
And as we advance in cooperation and recognizing the other,
vamos a construir un mundo más humano.
we will construct a more human world.
Well, thank you so much to our panel this morning. And that was Graya Casella with interpreter Cristina Torralbas, and she's a Venezuelan journalist. Also with us, China Global Television Network reporter Zhao Yunfei, and our very own Velim Tiane here at the SABC. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for engaging us. So that's a perspective from the media covering the 15th BRICS Summit here at the Santon Convention Center.